These are 8 crucial techniques inside n8n that you must master if you want to build scalable and production-ready solutions. We're using them every day in all of our workflows and build them for our clients. The first one is variable setting. Makes it easier for you and your clients to manage your workflows. Let's say we have something complex like this. We have one agent that has multiple sub-agents within this workflow. Some of these sub-agents have access to either the tools of the HTTP request or doing the HTTP request to connect to third-party platforms. And you need to replace API keys and set credentials across all of these sub-agents across your entire workflow. What we usually do is we have at the beginning of the flow an actual step where we set all the custom fields in one place. So for example, here, we're not only setting, let's say, the credential, like the API key, the assignee ID if you're connecting to the high level, and all other things, but we are also setting up the bot persona and some other parts of a prompt. If you ask why, because when we are using a multi-sub agent workflow, you might want to use this bot persona in the system prompt of your agent. So why would you want to go into this agent, find the part for the persona, if it would be here, change it here. Then if you want to use the same persona, you Control-C, you go back, you go to another agent, you replace it here. Then you replace it here, Control-C, you go back and you replace it here. I think you got the idea. So there is no need for you to change everything under all of the agents if this is one variable. You can set it first and then manage it afterwards. Now, very important thing to note that you can go beyond and really create an entire prompt for one of your agents, like here, within just the custom fields. So for example, here we have a custom field for the reply rules, for the user details, for the history interaction. There is a very specific reason why we're not using it here, but this could possibly all be inside the set field. So if we would set up another field here, right, then we would rename it properly, provide all the details of the prompt here, and then reference this set field as a prompt within this agent. So now let's say you are duplicating a lot of these workflows to all of your clients, or you're providing this workflow for the client to manage. Now your client doesn't need to go into all of these specifics and figure out where to change what information. You can mark this as a red zone to say that this is the most important thing within the workflow where you need to change the data. So now your client, or you, if you have a big workflow, understands that this is where the magic happens. And this is where, for example, he can change the name of the bot persona to Josh. So now all of the master agents and the sub agents within this workflow will act like Josh. The second technique is flow organization. Even though it is pretty simple, I still see that not a lot of people use it. If you go into the n8n, you can create the different folders as well as the tags. We have both, but usually the logic is we have a client or a project that has a folder like this. Under this folder, let's say a client, we have multiple workflows that are related to this specific client. And then we use the tags for the type of the triggers we are working with. Now, of course, we are focusing on the sales systems, conversational sales systems within the one prompt. That is why we have a lot of different connections to the WhatsApp, to the high level, to the Twilio, to the post-processing from the voice AI, and we are classifying them using the tags. But when we have a project with a client, we create a folder for the specific client and then handle all of and store all of the workflows under this one folder. The technique number 3 is multi-agent LLM handling. If we go back into this specific scenario, you can see that we have a lot of the sub-agents. Now, of course, you might not always use the agent step by itself. Sometimes you would use something like the extract information within the JSON schema. Sometimes you would want to use a chain of thought. But what is same for all of these nodes is that they require you to connect to the LLM model. That is why you can see in most of our workflows, we have this crazy spider web type of the thing. Now, of course, sometimes if it's the first time for you to actually see this workflow, you might get confused because there are so many things going on. But if you ignore all these lines, it actually becomes pretty clear that there is no way to build something like that without this specific technique. Because you will notice that all of these agents do not have a memory or the chat model thing under them. So they have it right here. This is where we set the conversation history through the Postgres Supabase as well as the LLM. So all of the nodes inside the n8n that needs to have access to either the memory or the LLM goes here. And you can see that it is also marked in red the same way as the custom field setting. Why? Because you would want to test it. We'll talk about the testing LLM model a bit later in the video, but let's say you would want to see how your workflow will be handled by another model. So here you can simply replace it to another model and you're going to be good to go. And of course, there are a few other techniques that you can use to actually test different models from different providers, and we'll talk about this later. So now you can deploy the solutions fast and you can test them even faster. And of course, if you want something to be handled by another model, you would just remove this connection and add a separate model here. So sometimes you would want to use a cheaper model for more simple processing and more advanced model like O3 for the chain of thought type of the processing. The fourth technique is knowledge-based management, where you can split the complex knowledge base by metadata. If we go to the same agent, you will see that we have 3 different places where the red rectangle is present. The first one is the set fields. The second one is the LLM and the Postgres memory, where you change it. And the third one is the knowledge base. Now, we're using the same technique from the previous tip because here you will see that all of these sub-agents are actually having this knowledge base as a tool. This is even easier for you to actually manage big complex agents that have access to multiple knowledge base resources, because you can have one knowledge base but with multiple metadata points. So here is how everything works. Let's say you will set up the knowledge base tool. You're going to provide the description, when to run this tool. You're going to have the Supabase here. And a very important note is that you'll have a table. Let's say there's going to be a table. If we go to, for example, this specific project and the table, you will see that we have the documents table. Now, within these documents, we have multiple data sources that we uploaded into this RAG knowledge base. So now the agent has access to this knowledge base. What if you have multi-sub-agent workflow, okay, like I do? Let's say I have an education and nurturing agent, I have the general agent, I have lead qualification agent, and I have customer support agent. Each of these agents needs to have a separate contacts from the knowledge base. You have two options. You have actually three. The first one is creating separate tables, right? You can use the same project, but you can set up different tables. So each table will store the information for each of these agents. And then you would just have, all of these things duplicated for each of these sub-agent. Now, the second option, which is the most straightforward one, is just to upload everything into one thing. Because it's RAG, you may say that, sure, it will be able to find the information. And I agree. For the most part, for most of the cases, that's not a problem. But when you're working with very precise data, when you need 100% accuracy and you do not want to mess anything up, you would want to split it into multiple tables, like in the step number 1. But as I said, it is not efficient of just duplicating all of these things and having all of these rectangles, popping up on the screen to create even more complex workflow. So your option would be to set up the metadata within the knowledge base. So you will see here that when we are querying the knowledge base with the supabase, we are also querying the documents that have key, aka the meta field named key, with this value. Let me give you an example. Let's say here, when the routing agent is routing the person into this lead nurturing agent, an education agent. Here, we are setting another field. This field is called metadata, and the value is, say, lead nurturing agent. Then, within this agent, we are providing the prompt, and we're connecting this agent to this knowledge base. So when this agent will query this knowledge base, we will only get the documents that have this metadata value. And it is coming from here. So let's say if we're working with a general agent, we have a separate field here, which is general agent, right? So here it was another name. Now, let's say the user is routed to the general agent, and this general agent is querying the same knowledge base. See, this is why it is very cool, because you do not need to have multiple tables here. You have one table with different metadata. And not only that, you only have one tool that all of the agents are connected to. And here, when querying this knowledge base, the key will be different. The key will not be the lead nurturing agent. So it will not get the documents that are not in this general agent field. Let me show you how it is actually done. Now, sometimes if we're doing it manually, we're using the Flowwise because this is the most straightforward way for you to upload the data into the supabase. There are hundreds of different ways. So if you go to the document storage here, stores, you'll actually have, I'll have it, you'll create a new one. You'll see that you're creating the new document store and you're gonna provide the information from your resource. Here's how to do that. You'll have the knowledge base. In order to upload the information to this knowledge base, you can use something like the Flowwise. You can create a new account. You can add a new data store. Once you're in, you'll add a document loader. So here you can get information from any of these resources. Now, let's say it's going to be text. Here, plain text. We're going to provide some random info, and I'll show you how it's going to put the information to the knowledge base with metadata. You're going to name this like test, and here you're going to put the random info. Here, the additional metadata. So you can add it. You can say key is the key, and then the value is the value from one of these set fields. So now, once you save it, text splitter, recursive, preview the chunks. So now, this chunks, obviously we have one chunk because I haven't provided any information, will have the key lead nurturing agent. So then you just proceed with actually having this and then upserting the chunks into your Supabase knowledge base. So now within this metadata, you will have this lead nurturing agent. So once you are querying the knowledge base and you're providing this in the metadata query name, it will only retrieve the documents that are relevant to this specific agent. And this is the way how we handle complex knowledge bases. The fifth n8n technique is intent classification, where you use a parent master agent to find the intent of the user or of your query and then route it to the subagent. I could go into the same workflow, but let me show you another one, which is the production version of one of the client workflows that is handling the email queries. You will see that here we have analyze user response agent. Now, it is not the agent step, but rather the classifier under here. We're using it because it's easier to then output the result and route it into the sub-agent. But here you will see that text to classify, we have the user input and we have the chat history. If we go into the actual expression, you'll see that it's pretty simple. When the user explicitly requests to know the information about the products, websites, any journal information. And then we have different categories or intents. So the first one is the fulfillment and delivery. So whenever someone is mentioning something about fulfillment and delivery, it's going to take this category. Same thing with the issue related to subscriptions, and same thing regarding the product inquiry. We also have a system prompt where we provide a lot of the different information for the context to make sure it works perfectly. So here, it's then going to route it to one of these agents, which, by the way, all route into these same, one type of the step, knowledge-based conversation history and LLM from the previous steps. So here, these are the separate agents that have separate prompts, pretty straightforward. Now, we are using it actually multiple times within the workflow. So for example, we use the same technique to classify if the user intent is a human handoff, aka if the user wants to talk to a human or if the user inquiry is actually matching one of the criteria where we need to do the human handoff. So here we're doing the same thing. So basically we are, providing a huge prompt to identify, to provide as a context the type of the outputs we're looking for when transitioning to the human. Then we are using this switch where we analyze this input, output, and when we say, okay, when it equals human handoff, we're actually making the API call, adding the tag, and doing the human handoff. If it's not, it goes to the second intent classification agent where the actual routing to the sub-agent is happening. The tip number 6 is error handling. You must master handling all of the errors that can potentially ruin the workflow and ruin the perception of your service delivery for the client. That is why you have quite a few different options. There are separate videos on the YouTube that you can find that go really in depth into error handling within the n8n. But you need to know the two techniques that will do 95% of the job. When you have API calls, pretty sure you know that in the settings, retry and the fail, you'll put retry, we usually set 4 in 15,000 milliseconds. So we're gonna retry it in the API call. I'm sure you know that in the settings, in the retry and fail, you can retry the actual API call if it fails multiple times. Usually we don't go above 4 and we set the wait between tries 5 seconds. This should be good to handle 80% of the errors that you are experiencing with the API calls. Now, when you have something not related to the API call or something more complex where you want to analyze the actual error information and then modify the workflow based on this information, you would use the error trigger. Basically, this trigger is going to be triggered every time you see the error within your workflow. Then you will have an email like the Gmail notification or something like the Telegram, Slack. We are using ClickUp for it because ClickUp is our management software. So we are putting the task on the ClickUp to one of our developers to check out the workflow when there is an error. Now, again, there are quite a few aspects into it. My goal is to tell you that this is must-have. There is no production workflow that you can do if you're not going to handle errors properly. Seventh technique is LLM model testing, where you can use OpenRouter to fast test your workflows. If you would want to use or test multiple LLM models within your workflow, you have two options. First one is using the direct integrations with all the providers like ChatGPT, Claude with Anthropic, or Gemini with Google. But it is not the most efficient way of doing that because you can get the OpenRouter account, then recharge your balance, and it will give you the access to all of the different models that you can potentially need in the list here. Very, very important note for you to know. We are never using OpenRouter in production version of the workflows. Only for the testing, when we try to identify which is the best model for this specific scenario. I'll explain why. We do not want to rely on a third-party provider, not because of the cost, but because of their reliability. Now, never in my life experienced any problems with the OpenRouter. I think that's a great software. They have a great system on the back end. It all runs smoothly. But this is just my side. You know, I want to be sure that if there is something wrong with the workflow and we set up, all the error handling modules, and if there is something wrong necessarily with specifically with the LLM, it is something going on, pretty bad on the OpenAI servers and not on the OpenRouter pipeline. That is why we do use it to test, for example, one of these bots to make sure, okay, is the best one to use here 4.1 or 4.0 going to be enough to make it cheaper, or we're going to use the Sonnet 4.0 or 3.7, or we're going to use the Gemini. So we are testing it here. But once the testing is done, as you can see in all of our production version things, we are actually using the direct integration with the OpenAI or Anthropic, because in my view, this is more reliable, and I want to make the workflow that is going to work long term, and I don't need to worry about third-party providers. The tip number 8 is always use self-hosted version of the n8n. First, why pay more? Second, it gives you the flexibility in terms of the security. It is pretty easy to set up. Usually the most easy type of the setup is using Hetzner as well as the Coolify. Now, there are hundreds of different ways to use it, but if you go to the Hetzner, you complete the verification, you add a new project, you choose the server, you set it up, Then you connect it with Coolify. Coolify has the instance of the n8n. Now you choose it here and you are pretty much ready to go. You're gonna pay a few dollars for the Hadsner and it's going to be good. Now, again, not only to save the money on the subscription, but also if you're deploying these solutions for the clients, when you say that it's going to be the self-hosted and the self-hosting service is actually, for example, GDPR compliant, you have more value. You're adding the value to your services, and now the clients actually understand that you care about the things that are more important for the actual business. Now, guys, I hope you like this. If you have any questions, let me know. Check out other videos about the n8n where I explain some of the agents that I was showing on this video in the details, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.